For starters, I think, like right from the get-go, I think Maggie Robertson is actually voicing someone in Resident Evil 9 or perhaps a future Resident Evil game. So in today's video, I'm actually going to be talking about something that I thought was very suspicious that we kind of saw at Summer Games Fest 2025 that we have to talk about. Now, before we get started with this video, it is worth noting that this is a theory video. So of course, with any theory, there's always a possibility of this being incorrect. But mind you, I do have a very good track record when it comes to theories. For example, just to name a few of the theories that are kind of popular on my channel, I did theorize that Ethan Winters was going to die in Resident Evil 8 Village, which of course ended up being true. And on top of that, I also theorized that the dog was not dead in RE4 Remake, since a lot of the community kind of assumed that that was the case. But kind of going into today's topic as to the weird thing that I noticed. What was it? Well, it has to do with Maggie Robertson making an appearance, aka the voice actor that portrayed Lady Dimitrescu at Summer Games Fest. She actually showed up twice, so it even got way more suspicious as the show was going on. We did see Maggie kind of first making an appearance, kind of showcasing the 30th anniversary and how Capcom did have a sale during Summer Games Fest. And in the second time, we did see Maggie kind of pass the torch over to Jun Takuichi, who of course did tease Resident Evil 9 at the end of Summer Games Fest. But I don't think this was the only thing that Capcom showcased. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think, to my knowledge, Capcom has ever kind of brought in an actor, a Resident Evil actor, to kind of showcase their products, like what happened at Summer Games Fest 2025. I don't think that's ever happened before, especially when it comes to an actor who hasn't portrayed a character since Resident Evil 8 Village. Like, I found that very, very strange. Mind you, for those of you that don't know, Village released 4 years ago. So it's not like the last Resident Evil game, like for example, Resident Evil 4, which came out in 2023, the remake, of course. So, I mean, like that's also very suspicious. And so of course, this kind of begs the question, what the frick was Maggie Robertson doing at Summer Games Fest? And to be honest, I actually have 4 options. For starters, I think, like right from the get-go, I think Maggie Robertson is actually voicing someone in Resident Evil 9 or perhaps a future Resident Evil game that might be releasing next year. And judging by Capcom's track record, recent track record, mind you, it wouldn't be a far-fetched idea that, Maggie is voicing someone else in Resident Evil 9 or a future Resident Evil game, mostly due to the fact that if we look back to Resident Evil 8 Village, we did have a lot of actors that made an appearance in other games. For example, Nicole Tompkins, the voice of Jill Valentine, she did also make a return in RE8 Village. She did play that NPC kind of rando lady called Elena, I believe was her name. And on top of that, we also got Jeff Sheen, who played Carlos in RE3 Remake 2020, and then, ended up playing Chris in 2021 in Resident Evil Village. And also we got Neo Newbon, who played Nikolai in RE3 Remake, and also Heisenberg in Resident Evil 8. So with all of that being said, let's actually get into the specifics of my theory. So the 4 options, let's start with option number 1. Since we saw that Resident Evil 9, we had multiple characters that were kind of showcased. For example, we got Grace Ashcroft. We saw a lot of randos in the trailer, but we also saw the FBI director. And of course, speaking of the FBI director, he did mention something very interesting. He did say that Grace's mother, aka Alyssa Ashcroft, did die a number of years before. And on top of that, we also saw kind of like a flashback, is what I'm assuming, because the camera was kind of fidgeting and all. Like there was like a certain part of the trailer where the camera kept flickering, which one could ascertain is a flashback specifically coming from Grace Ashcroft, who, she might have gone with her mom to someplace and her mom protected her or something along those lines. But going back to my theory, I think it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that Maggie Robertson might end up voicing Alyssa Ashcroft in Resident Evil 9. I think it would be very strange if Capcom brought an older actor back. That hasn't happened in a long time. I would say it hasn't happened since Matthew Mercer, which of course was, I would say it's not a game per se. It was a CGI movie. Of course, I'm referring to Resident Evil Death Island, since Matthew Mercer did portray Leon in Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil Damnation, Resident Evil Vendetta as well. So, I think for Matthew's case, it's a bit more specific. So anyways, going back to what I was saying, I don't think it would make a lot of sense to bring back an old actor from Outbreak. Since I was seeing in my comments in my Resident Evil 9 breakdown that there was some people assuming that they were going to bring back like all of the voices from the past, like Kevin Ryman, I believe. I don't know. This is not my theory. This is just something that I read in the comments, but I think that that's very unlikely to happen, as opposed to us actually getting a familiar actor from 4 years ago to portray this, classic character, Alyssa Ashcroft. So that's definitely one possibility. But the second option that I think is way more interesting, and it honestly goes along with a theory of mine that I had and posted on the channel roughly around a year ago, that has to do with Maggie perhaps portraying Alex Wesker. Now, the reason I say this is because the first time that I saw, Maggie make an appearance at Summer Games Fest, the first thing I noticed was her outfit. Her hair, her whole look, it was very reminiscent to Alex Wesker. Maggie did portray Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil 8. And I think the only thing out of her outfit, I think that could make the counter argument that that's why she was dressed like that, because she has played Lady Dimitrescu, was kind of her shirt and just the color of her suit. But aside from that, her whole outfit just screamed Alex Wesker, which would not be far-fetched. As mentioned, I did go over a theory last year, so make sure to go check out that video. In the video, I do detail how the Wesker siblings, specifically Albert and as well as Alex, could be the ones responsible as to why, we kind of saw the BSAA use BOWs near the end of Resident Evil 8 Village. So as mentioned, I'm kind of just going through the whole theory really quickly for you guys. I'm giving a summation, but definitely go and check that out. The other thing that's also worth mentioning when it comes to Maggie possibly portraying Alex Wesker is the fact that her voice, I don't know, for me, I wouldn't be mad if Maggie just didn't change her voice and just used the same voice that she had for Alcina Dimitrescu for Alex Wesker. Because, I don't know, I think it would just fit the character really nicely.
Fear what you will become, and become what you fear.
What? Are you afraid? You can tell me. Talk to me.
What are you talking about?
Those bracelets change color in response to fear.
Mother Miranda, I regret to inform you that Ethan Winters has escaped that fool Heisenberg. Because he is in my castle and has already proven too much for my daughters to handle.
We also had the same thing happen with Jeff Sheen. As mentioned before, we had, Carlos and Chris sounding exactly the same, Joe Valentine and Elena sounding exactly the same, right? I think the only person that kind of tried to sound different was Nikolai and as well as Heisenberg, aka Neil Newbon. But going back to what I was saying, I don't even think, if Maggie Robertson is in fact playing Alex Wesker, I don't think she has to do much. I think the same voice that she uses for Lady Dimitrescu, aka Alcina Dimitrescu, I think could definitely work. And by the way, before we get to the last two options, if you guys are enjoying this kind of theory video of mine, then please make sure to leave a like and also share the video. It helps me out a ton. By the way, once we reach 8K, I am going to be doing a Q&A, so be on the lookout for that. We're just about to hit that milestone, which honestly, thank you to everybody that's been watching my channel. I know we've gotten a lot more views than subscribers, which, you know what, funny enough, that's always seems to be the case. I don't know. I don't really tell people to subscribe, but you know what, now that I think about it, subscribe if you like what you're seeing. But anyways, moving on to option number 3, as I just mentioned, it wouldn't be far-fetched for Maggie to portray Alex Wesker, but if she's not going to be making an appearance in RE9 as Alex Wesker, again, one could ascertain that this could be for Revelations 3, which would make the most sense, in my opinion, even though, as mentioned last year, I did kind of theorize that, Alex Wesker would be really cool if we saw Albert and Alex kind of making appearance in RE9. But it would make sense, logical sense for us to see, Alex Wesker in Resident Evil Revelations 3. Another bit of evidence that kind of supports this idea of us seeing Alex Wesker in a potential Revelations 3 can be seen with the very few leaks that have actually been true when it comes to Resident Evil. Now, funny enough, last video we did discuss how, Resident Evil has had some of the worst track record when it comes to leaks. We discussed various leaks. We also talked about that leaker that's always contradicting himself. By the way, speaking of which, I do have to make another video kind of talking about another bit of contradictions that he's recently made, but we'll go over that once we get more RE9 news. But going back to what I was saying, one of the few leaks that ended up being true was the 2020 Capcom data breach, where there was a bunch of games that were leaked on there, right? Like, for instance, we knew that Resident Evil 4 Remake was actually going to be made. We also knew that they were working on a Resident Evil Hunt game and a Resident Evil Apocalypse, and also, which a lot of people, I guess, are assuming, I've always assumed that that was Resident Evil 9, which is highly likely now, but of course that is unconfirmed whether or not that was in fact Resident Evil 9. Again, it wouldn't be shocking if it was. And we also got Resident Evil Outrage, which of course had a lot of details kind of surrounding it that kind of assumed that that game was going to be Revelations 3. Of course, this is unconfirmed, but that's, I guess, one of the only bits of evidence that kind of supports the theory that perhaps, we might end up getting a new game showcase next year with the 30th anniversary, right? I mean, it wouldn't be shocking. Maybe we might end up getting like a Resident Evil Hunt game next year. Again, this is not far-fetched because that was honestly one of the few leaks that we got from Resident Evil that ended up being true. But I guess another counter argument to that position and that bit of evidence of us getting a Revelations 3 could be seen in the fact that Resident Evil 9's director is, the same director for Resident Evil 7 and as well as Resident Evil Revelations 1. So again, it wouldn't be far-fetched for him to honestly kind of continue forward what we saw in Revelations 2. So again, this is based on speculation. So, there's no obvious, confirmation on this, but, it's kind of an interesting way to look at things, right? That if we don't get Lady D's voice actor, aka Maggie Robertson, portraying Alex Wesker in Resident Evil 9, it could very well be that she might be doing that for the 30th anniversary. Another bit of evidence that kind of supports this idea can be seen that in Summer Games Fest, since, she was actually brought on to kind of showcase the 30th anniversary for Resident Evil. I don't remember if that was the first trailer or the second, I guess, trailer where she appeared in. And I guess that leads us to option number 4, which, could very well be that the reason that Maggie Robertson showed up was just because Capcom, wanted somebody familiar to kind of showcase their products. But as mentioned before, with everything said in the video, her being dressed exactly like Alex Wesker, even with the hair kind of back, I don't know, like it's kind of suspicious. And not to mention, as stated at the beginning of the video, it is weird that we're getting, Maggie Robertson up on stage, especially since she hasn't been in a Resident Evil game since like 4 years. It would have made way more sense if we would have gotten somebody that was in their more recent Resident Evil launch, which of course was Resident Evil 4 Remake. So I don't know. I don't buy option number 4. Click this video if you guys want to see that 5 things Resident Evil 9 should do that I shot last year. And by the way, if you guys are going to share my theory out there with other people, make sure to credit me, since there is a big plagiarism problem in the Resident Evil YouTube space. I have had to call out some YouTubers in the past that have stolen my theories. So please make sure to credit me. That would help me out a ton. But anyways, thank you so much for watching.